quite a few questions that came in this week, and but before we get into that, what I wanted to do is we were kind of talking a little bit about authentic leadership, and then you mentioned right before we went on live about survivor's guilt, and I'm like, oh yes, we've been hearing quite a bit in the news, a lot of downsizing going around. This could be a tough year, and we want to have folks, ready and prepared, and from that standpoint. So I know that when folks are like go, they like, I thought of it. Yeah, they got a lot more work to go when their colleagues have been let go, and who should have been over the wall first. But you brought up a good point about survivor's guilt, and tell us a little bit more about that, especially in the coaching that you do with individuals in that area.
For a lot of individuals. So organizations go through their organizational change, and we know that organizations must evolve, right? It happens all the time. And so there is this essence of, well, oh my God, it is so devastating for those that are leaving. Absolutely, it's devastating for those that are leaving, especially if it's not something that they wanted, right? For some, they're happy. Right? They're like, oh, I got a package, we can go, or I can retire now, right? But for others, like we often don't think about those that stay behind, right? And sometimes those that stay behind do have a little bit of survivor's guilt, right? So how did I survive through this? What does this mean to me now? Can I still trust this organization? If they did it to them, will they do it to me? And so there's a little bit of emotion that's important to process if you're the one that stays, right, as your colleagues are leaving. So I mentioned survivor's guilt because that's what I call it, right? It's that guilt of being that staying. And Rod, you mentioned something really important, right? It's, well, who does all that work go to, right? But aside from the work, there is emotions to be processed for all of the individuals that stay. And what does that emotion mean, right? How do I process that and at the same time move myself forward, move my team forward, move my organization forward? Because there is, in essence, a little bit, it could be guilt for some, it could be sadness, it could be all sorts of emotion. So how do I recognize what that emotion is within me? And then what do I do with it now that I recognize that I too have been impacted, even if I'm staying, right? So staying is an impact as well. So I think that for individuals, it's important to just recognize it does impact you too. Yeah, to the individual, to the team. Even there's even an awkwardness. Do I reach out to them? Right? Do I not? Because they're gone and I'm still here. What does that mean? How do I have a conversation with them? Because we've worked together for 10 years, or we've worked together for X amount of time, whatever that is. And so recognizing that all of that is a process, right? And no one talks about that. For the people who stay, no one talks about that. Right? No one recognizes it, but it is a real thing. It is something that we all have to process emotions for everything that happens to us, and it's a change, and anytime that there's change, it's an emotion. There's an emotion associated with it, right? For some it might be the happiness, and for others it might, oh my God, like this is it's like the grieving cycle that I'm going through, right? I now have to reconcile it. I now have to let go. I have to figure out, can I reach out to them? Will we still be friends? Will we not? So there's a lot to it. There is
Yeah.
certainly a lot to it.
There's another individual who I've been speaking to, and there's some downsizing going around, and it's been going around for some time. And it's like they're not staffing up, they're not hiring others. It's just a dwindling, right? It's just like from 20 to 15 to 8 to 4, works the same.
Hmm.
But I would say they're almost like a panic frozen, that they're almost like stuck, that they can't get out. they're fretful about looking for work. They're just frozen. I mean, it's like almost in a state of being frozen. And I'm like, I'm not sure what's the right thing to share, because they know their number is going to be coming up. They know they're going to be downsized. They don't want to be downsized. And they just feel like a frustrated frozen. If you were, and I know you need to have a lot more information, but what would, like, just the general sense or theme that to help them at least to get unstuck?
Mm. Well, I mean, Rod, I think that's a great question. I will say this. I mean, everybody is going to have their own process and their own journey. I was working with an organization at one point that decided to realign all of their services, and everyone had to apply for their jobs again, right? And for some, the choice was, I want to stay, and more importantly, I want to get a package, right? And so for those who stay, there's a reason why you're staying. So is it really that you're immobilized, or is there some rationale for you to stay because you know your number's up and is coming up soon, you're going to be one of those people, and there's some remuneration that you're going to get at the end of it, right? So it could be that. It could be something entirely different, right? It could be that it's the job has become their identity, and they can't identify with anything other than that job. And so if the job is your identity, it's a you're going through a grieving process even while you're in it, right? So it's about understanding what it is, the process that you're going through, what stage you're in, what does it mean to you right now, and then how do you look towards something else. I will say this though, um, the most powerful thing that you can do, especially when you're in that, oh my God, I don't know when the shoe's going to drop or whatever, is to move to action, right? Because you're for the most part, you're victim to the situation until you move to action and make a decision. And that decision could be, I'm staying here because of the package that I'm going to get, or I'm moving myself to action because I know that there's power in that, right? And so I'm going to start searching, and I'm going to have a few conversations with people. Nobody says tomorrow you have to find a job, but moving to action actually gives you that sense of power and your own control, like you're owning your career, as opposed to I'm letting things happen to me and I'm a victim of the situation, right? So there's opportunities there. So you're looking to progress. So as you're sitting there and you're describing the words for how for the things that excite you or the things that you're passionate about, start to think about those things that excite you. I don't like to be stagnant. That means I want to continually evolve. I'm a learner just by trait. I'm interested in finances. I like to support people. So we went from one thing to now, look where we're at, right? And I think it's more of the narrative that you tell yourself as opposed to the reality of who you are, right? How often do you give yourself the chance to really explore who you are? And that's what we're here for, right? Is to
Mhm.
support you in figuring out what is it that makes you you? What is it that makes you tick? And what is that thing that you give to the universe that might be different than the way that anybody else gives it? So, executive presence is very, very hard to define. The reason that it's hard to define is because some people see it as as one thing, and others conflate it with something else, something entirely different. But executive presence is more about how do I have that? I've heard it described as what is the gravitas that I have when I go into a room? Can I command a meeting? Can I command um, like a room, right? How is it that I show up in the room? Am I really me? Or do I have the presence that's seen as a senior leader? Right. And so when people talk about executive presence, that's essentially what they're looking at. There's a fantastic book by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. It's called Executive Presence: The Missing Link Between Merit and Success. And it is such a fantastic book because what it does look at is that people have a tendency to think about, well, I've worked really, really hard and I've achieved so much. Well, I deserve to be here. But what they don't recognize is that when you look at a lot of senior leaders, they show up a certain way, they look a certain way. Now, here's the thing, it's not saying that there's no diversity, right? Because you don't all have to look a certain way. What it's saying is, how do I show up? Can I influence? Can I be the one that brings alignment? Can I be the one that um, that shows up in a room and is seen by others as the leader? Right? That's presence. That's executive presence. When you look at senior leaders, especially CEOs, they, for the most part, most do have the strong executive presence about. That's the book.
Yeah, executive
Mhm.
presence, the missing link between merit and success. Love it. I will add that to my list of things that I'm always reading and all that. That's awesome. Thank you for that. And one of the things that I encourage individuals is know your stories of success throughout your career. Keep them readily available, knowing, you know, let it not be when you're in the interview and they ask you a question about, could you tell me a time when this happened? You're like, you should have these like really the success stories and not just, yeah, I did this here, but give them that story. You know, we're you know in the U.S. and in North, you know, in the Western Hemisphere, we love stories, be it in Latinos with the novelas or the stories that we see or the real, you know, the real life programming that we get on the TV. We love storytelling, and rags to riches even better. So if you could come about this overcoming of how you came and all types of things, have those stories available. And what you do, and what was the outcome of that, and having it handy will separate you from others. You Wonderful. Last thoughts before we wrap up, Jeanette?
Last thoughts. I'm drawn to your tagline today. And I think this session has all been about how do you know yourself so that you can own your career a little bit differently than you've been doing. Whether you're new in your career or you're mature in your career, know yourself so you can own it and take it to where you want it to be versus where someone else is determining that you're going to take it to. So,
Amen. Well, that's a wrap. I'm Rod Colon, and that's Jeanette Iglesias with our 302nd show. And Jeanette's now joining in on the 300 side, but we've been having some fun. Thank you to our producer, Alicia Ramos, and everyone else behind the scene with her. And thank you to our audience here. And we'll be back next week. Good night.